Hello, everyone.
All right. How is everybody doing? Please say a note about how you're doing in the chat. It's Saturday. Can all shake it off a little bit. And please drop into the chat as we get started where you're coming in from. Um, please welcome all of our guests to the reverse keynote for critical conversations on reproductive health care, past, present, and future. Just a quick land acknowledgement, and I'm going to do it from Johns Hopkins University campuses, although I know that we're in many different places because of, you know, the pandemonium. The Johns Hopkins University campuses, once upon a time, among others, the site of the Carroll Plantation and the site of chattel slavery, are located on the traditional unceded lands of the Piscataway and Susquehannock peoples. We recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land, including the Piscataway, Lumbee, Eastern Band of Cherokee, and many other tribes, and we give thanks to the past, present, and future stewards of this land and respect their sovereignty and right to self-determination. We look forward to moving into a better future together. And part of that better future has to be revolutionary mothering. This visionary text published in 2016, the artists, creators, writers, thinkers, mothers of all shapes and forms knew that when they brought their work together to give us this foundational and truly important and life-changing book. I'm going to read a little bit just from the blurb. Inspired by the legacy of radical and queer Black feminists of the 1970s and 80s, revolutionary mothering places marginalized mothers of color at the center of a world of necessary transformation. The challenges we face as movements working for racial, economic, reproductive, gender, and food justice, as well as anti-violence, anti-imperialist, and queer liberation, are the same challenges that many mothers face every day. Oppressed mothers create a generous space for life in the face of life-threatening limits, activate a powerful vision of the future while navigating tangible concerns in the present, and move us towards a future that we cannot always see. Revolutionary Mothering is a movement shifting anthology, and it really is, was, and always will be. This text came together in a tradition of speaking back to all kinds of things, from the Moynihan Report to No Women, No Womb. That tells you how internet old I am. To the 2021 present of abortion restrictions, to Black femicide, trans, and cis, to living in the U.S. context, at least, in the country with the second highest rates of infant mortality in the so-called first world. To rethinking mothering from the context of a world in which mothers of color are faced with premature death of their children in a whole host of forms. Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Relisha Rudd, 9-year-old Black girls who are tased even while shouting that they are a child, the forced sterilization of Puerto Rican and Black women, postpartum deaths. We know that all of these things are things that are happening to Black women, Indigenous women, brown women, queer folks, folks with wombs who do not identify as women. And what revolutionary mothering did and continues to do is remind us that mothering is beyond just the birth process, not just, but I've just been through it, it's not just, is beyond the birthing process, is beyond biology. Mothering oppressed, out of oppressed communities is a queer formulation. As Alexis Pauline Gumbs writes in her contribution, part of the project of seeing mothering as a queer collaboration with the future has to do with transforming the parenting relationship from a property relationship to a partnership in practice. I also want to note, as and Alexis Pauline Gumbs is one of the editors, note also, as Mai'a Williams says in one of her essays in the book, no matter where I go in this life of exile, revolution, and mamas, frontlines and daughters are what feed my life. This book came from a vision I had of mamas who believe in themselves and their children and the future, and ancestors so fiercely they will face down the ugly violence of the present time and time again. And this book also came out in a particular moment of media organizing, radical media organizing, as China Martin talks about in her, one of the editors, the third editor, China Martin, talks about in her piece. It has been women of color bloggers and other marginalized media makers who have most helped inform my rebel path, expanding clarification and continuing explorations of race and class to build the world we want and to reject what is killing us. So many letters and conversations, works and efforts in a world where often for a mother, there is no time to spare. Today, we have the pleasure of a fantastic panel of those who were contributors, those who want to celebrate the text, and those who want to have a conversation together. And so what we'll do is we'll have panelists speak individual remarks, and then we'll have a group conversation with the panelists, and then we'll open up for questions so we can all broadly celebrate this book. On the intro comments, last thing I'll say as part of this intro, the intro comments on on the first day on Wednesday of this conference, I noted that this is a text that I have read that was transformational to me, that I read and bought again when I had my first child, that I sent it to my mother. I've sent my mother a link to this video, so I'm hoping that she is watching. This is such an important book, and so I just want to thank everybody who was involved for the creation of it, and look forward to this conversation. And we have with us today Cecilia Caballero, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity at USC. She also has BAs in English and Chicano Studies from UC Berkeley, and an A in Liberal Arts from Los Venanos Community College. Her dissertation focuses on narratives of Chicana mothering, feminism, gender, sexuality, and spiritual activism in Chicana literature, cultural production, and digital storytelling. In addition, she researches the intersections between Black and Chicana feminist speculative theory by Octavia Butler and Gloria Anzaldúa. Her scholarly and creative writing has been published by Chicana Latina Studies, Third Woman Press, The Acentos Review, The Body is Not an Apology, and more. And she is co-editor of the book, The Chicana Mother Work Anthology from the University of Arizona Press, and the Feminist Wire book series. We also have with us Kellee Coleman, who's over 18 years of social justice community organizing experience, integrating media and popular education as strategies for social change. She co-founded Vibrant Women Mama Sana Prenatal Clinic, a project of mamas of color rising that provides holistic and culturally specific prenatal care, birth companions, midwifery services, prenatal fitness, and nutrition services to lower income Black and Latina folks in the Austin area. Kellee is a single mom of 3 children. We also have with us Tanay Lynn Harris, founder of Mommy Up and co-founder of the Bloom Collective in Baltimore. Yes, Baltimore. Mommy Up is a bold community for mamas and women to thrive along the parenting journey. And the Bloom Collective provides vital support to community, including breastfeeding and chest feeding consultations, psychotherapy, holistic childbirth education, parenting counseling, and reproductive and racial justice research and trainings. Tanay has worked at various national and international human rights and racial justice institutions over the past 15 years. And becoming a mother during the Baltimore uprising is what inspired her to make family and mothering the focus of her work. Victoria Law is a freelance journalist whose work focuses on intersections of incarceration, gender, and resistance. She is the author of Resistance Behind Bars, The Struggles of Incarcerated Women, co-author of Prison by Any Other Name, The Harmful Consequences of Popular Reforms, and co-editor of Don't Leave Your Friends Behind, Concrete Ways to Support Families in Social Justice Movements and Communities. Her writings about incarceration have appeared in various online and print outlets, including the New York Times, Nation, Wired, Miss Magazine, and Truth Out. She and her daughter both live in New York City. And we have 2 of the editors of Revolutionary Mothering with us. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Mai'a Williams, writer and artist residing in Minneapolis in rural Minnesota, who was there living and working with Egyptian, Palestinian, Congolese, and Central American indigenous mothers and resistance communities that inspired their life-giving work in art-making practices. Their work focuses on how we survive in the face of the ongoing destruction of the only world we have ever known. They are currently co-creating healing and mutual aid networks in Minneapolis in the midst of a pandemic and a movement for abolition. They are the co-editor of the anthology, Revolutionary Mothering. And they are the author of the memoir, This Is How We Survive, Revolutionary Mothering, War, and Exile in the 21st Century. And we also have China Martens, writer, organizer, activist, and mother who's been working on the importance of community support and social justice for collective well-being for over 30 years. She has written and co-authored numerous books and essays focusing on the importance of true inclusion and diversity in social justice work, including The Future Generation, the zine book for subculture parents, kids, friends, and others, a compilation of 16 years of her zine, The Future Generation. She co-founded Kid City, a radical childcare collective, and has facilitated numerous workshops to create support for families and activists in radical communities at universities, conferences, and healing spaces, including the Civil Liberties and Public Policy Conference and Allied Media Conference. China is a 50-year-old single mother of a 33-year-old who was born in Baltimore. I am so excited to have you all here, and I'm going to step back and turn it over to Cecilia and let you guys take it away for individual reflections and sharing. So thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much, Jessica, for your comments and your introductions. I'm really happy to be here to really uplift this amazing book. This is my very well-loved copy. Lots of notes in here. Yeah, so I think I have about 5 minutes. So what I'm going to do is just really talk briefly how I engaged with this book, and then I'll also close with a poem. So first, when this book came out, I think I'm not sure how I heard about it, but I pretty much bought it as soon as I could. And later I realized I hadn't seen the call for papers or the call for submission, but when I got this book, it felt so affirming to have this radical framework for mothering. And at the time, well, I am a single mother of one, and being a woman of color, and also coming into my own sense of self, but also my own sense of mothering. And there are so many things I love about this anthology, but one of them, I have really engaged with the works of Alexis Pauline Gumbs here and elsewhere, her other books. So one chapter that has resonated with me was the republication of June Jordan's essay that comes right at the beginning. And I know that the editors, frame this essay by June Jordan as really informing the philosophy of, what revolutionary mothering is. And this idea that Alexis Pauline Gumbs has also developed about love as life force. And how can we organize around this concept in our mothering, and the other aspects that this book advanced for me, just resonating with me in terms of the poetry, the personal narratives, but also how I think it really expanded our understandings of what mothering and parenting and caretaking can be beyond biological categories. Mothering across community. It's something that's not always tied to a specific gender identity or category, or something that's so individual, although often our society is still structured that way. And it's also not to minimize the work that single mothers and single parents do, but I think, and I'm also a single mother, so and that's also been difficult in terms of like the pandemic and having even more labor, caretaking labor. But I think this book, that's what it was able to come into. This book was able to come into our organizing spaces. So when this book came out, I remember I had a book club with some women from and caretakers from Boyle Heights in East LA, and we met and discussed this book. And it was a group of us who are educators and organizers and active in the community in different ways. And we were able to have this shared text and to have these experiences. And although all of us have been in community in different ways, to use this book to explore these different aspects of our mothering and parenting in this politicized way. And so I'll close with a poem that I wrote. I actually was working on it the night before I got the invitation to this panel about Henrietta Lacks. And maybe during the discussion, we'll have some more time, maybe if we circle back around to this. But Henrietta Lacks was also a mother. She was a young mother, and she passed away from cervical cancer, and also her cells were stolen and by Johns Hopkins, right? And she was treated here at Johns Hopkins in at the time during the Jim Crow era, where even medical treatment also was segregated. So she had to receive her subpar treatment at in what was called the colored wards, right? So and the kind of cancer she had was cervical cancer. So, you know, for Henrietta Lacks, it's very much tied to the theme of this conference in terms of, you know, what is reproductive justice. Henrietta Lacks as a Black mother being separated from her children in these, what was called the colored wards, and then passing away, and then Western science profiting from her even now. So I'll read, you know, so what does justice look like for Henrietta Lacks? Henrietta Lacks as a Black mother. So the title of my poem is called The Revenge of Henrietta Lacks. She owns you. You owe her your life, all your medical advancements, the secrets to an immortal life held in her cells that never die. Black women will never die. Her cells travel space, clone themselves, created the polio and COVID-19 vaccines, blood pressure and antidepressants her daughter swallowed to keep herself alive. She lived in the former slave quarters of her ancestors. She was a tobacco plantation farmer. She tended the plants, dried the leaves, packaged the profit, and she worked the land under the 100-year-old oak tree at the home house. She was a 14-year-old mother. She declined medical treatments for toothaches, syphilis, and injuries. Happy Home was noted into her medical file. She was told she had cancer, didn't tell anyone. At the public wards for colored women, she was afraid her womb would be taken from her. She wanted to mother more. She was treated with radium that was sewn into her cervix, a glow-in-the-dark substance. During her first cancer treatment, her cells were taken with the umbilical cord blood from Black babies and mothers and used to make cell cultures made of salt, water, and particles of plasma. And her cancer was mixed with chicken blood. And her cancer was mixed with chicken blood. And her cancer was mixed with chicken blood, taken with a syringe from the still beating heart of a chicken. And they call us witch doctors. And they call us witch doctors. And they call us witch doctors. And we are. A white woman labeled her cells Gila and wrote, 30-year-old female lying quietly in no evident distress. And now, her Blackness be spreading all inside you. Blackness is not a cancer, but it cannot be killed. Thank you.
All right, so Jessica, should I just jump in? Okay.
Yeah.
That was amazing, Cecilia. I'm like thrown off a little bit. Get myself together. My name's Kellee Coleman, and I'm here in the land of the Tonkawa people and the Kwalitekan people, the Apache Comanche folks too. I'm also in a place where we celebrate Juneteenth, right, in Austin, Texas. That's what we do. I was a member of Mamas of Color Rising, which is a collective of poor and working class parents of color. And honestly, we got together because we needed each other, right? We had to take care of each other and help, co-parent each other's babies. And so it really was out of need. And the experience like changed the trajectory of my life. So I wanted to share that we were so honored to get to be invited to be a contributor to this book. We had together created early on, like in 2009, I think we had a zine called Revolutionary Mothering. And I think that's how I met China for the first time, and Vicky. It was at AMC, right? That's where everybody meet. And through our work too, since we were, sort of a group of like regular folks, we had this amazing organizer that was a part of our group named Mariana Matahano, and she was a really dope facilitator and had us participate in this activity to create the poem. So it's not just like something we came up with together, but we brought objects from home, and we were actually at this beautiful place called Alma de Mujer in Austin, and we had childcare from our childcare collective La Semilla, and we shared what those objects meant, and then we put it together in a poem. So it's something that is really special to us, and something that we like, that we made together to share, right? A lot of our work is really built around what we were going through. And so at the time, we were really looking at sort of like welfare systems. And because we all was on welfare, right? We were all on Medicaid, food stamps, getting childcare subsidies, or trying to, right? And so the work that we were doing really revolved around that. And then we decided to sort of try to really focus on something. And that was when we started doing these sort of impromptu surveys and conversations in the welfare offices we would be in. And through that work, we were able to figure out that even though folks were struggling financially with their health, with safety and housing and all those things, that that birth was one of the deepest sort of, like qualitatively ways that we could support folks, right? That really impacted like how you parent, how you love yourself, and also, how your children are gonna be supported, right? And so that's what we decided to focus on. And we also realized in that work that it's, because we were entering into these state systems, that we kind of changed, or felt like we could shift the framework around the school to prison pipeline from like, from the womb to prison pipeline, right? Because that's where people, you start being surveilled, is really early on, and being policed. And so we did a lot of that work too. So I'm talking off the cuff. Am I good on time? Am I okay? Or should I?
You got another minute or two.
Okay. I'm not, at the time, I think when we first started that year, I had 2 kids at the time when we started. I had my daughter Journey, who is incredible, and I had my other child Uzi, who is also the most incredible person in the world. So when we first really started to create this praxis of supporting each other, I think we were struggling to figure out how we do everything all at the same time. and realizing that we couldn't, we really wanted to make sure that that we would be able to do what we could and do it really well. And so we kind of did some policy stuff. We sued the state of Texas around food stamp discrimination, which was crazy because I think only a few of us had like degrees at the time. And all of us was hustling some kind of way, right? Like, you know, and then we pushed the state around, we were able to push around a rules change for Medicaid to cover midwifery in Texas. Even though Austin didn't benefit, we were still able to get it changed, and then other folks were able to benefit from that rules change. And then something I'm really proud of is the shackling law here in Texas that we were able to push up against too, with some of the organizing we did around one of my good friends who lost her baby in Travis County Jail. Her name is my friend, Sheila. So I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do and that we continue to do. Right now, we're part of a larger coalition where we do mutual aid to for each other and for our community. And yeah, I think that's it for now. Oh, real quick. I just wanted to acknowledge the connections too that I think are super important, right? Like Stephanie from the Bloom Collective and Paula Rojas from Mamas of Color Rising are tight like toast and jelly, right? And I don't think there would be no Mamas of Color Rising if it wasn't for that relationship, right? And the work that Sister to Sister did back in the Gap. So I wanted to make sure and just acknowledge that connection and our connection to Young Women United in Albuquerque years ago when we wrote Revolutionary Motherhood, the zine. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you for that, Kellee. You know, there's so many different things that it's like, whoa, that show the connection. But I think it also goes to the importance of the anthology in itself when we're thinking about revolutionary mothering, the importance of how we see ourselves within each other and our connectivity to each other. Very interestingly enough, this week, me and my 5-year-old had a moment. And I immediately said, I don't deserve to be on the revolutionary mothering panel because I yelled at my 5-year-old, and he sure enough told me about myself, which, you know, we oftentimes have been raised that our children are to be seen and not heard. And lo and behold, I pick up the anthology and go to my favorite, very much like Cecilia, June Jordan's The Creative Spirit, and where she says on page 12 at the bottom, children are the ways that the world begins again and again. If you fasten upon that concept of their promise, you will have trouble finding anything more awesome and also anything more extraordinarily exhilarating than the opportunity and the obligation to nurture a child into his or her own freedom. And I contended with that of the reminder that our children come to us whole, and it's for all of us to help work them through their own liberation. And really how the reflection for us is us doing that liberatory work on ourselves. And very much, you know, the love factor within Creative Spirit, which I really believe is the mothering piece, regardless of gender, regardless of all of the things, the very real way in how we show up together, and how revolutionary mothering is very much a reminder that the village is vital, and how much we need community, and nothing that we do, that everything that we do is for the benefit of others, and that none of it can really be done in isolation. And how our collective reimagining requires a deep love and our interdependence to one another. It also is a reflection for me to think through, and how I challenge myself to not just only call out systems and structures, but also to acknowledge the ways in how those systems and those structures are made manifest within myself because of the socialization within the society in which we live in, right? And so it's one thing if I call out the racism that I face and the harm and the oppression, but I equally have to think about the ways in how I might be harmful in community, how I might be harmful as a mother, how I might, all of those particular things. And so it's like a challenge for myself to do the work of unlearning and relearning new ways of being and becoming. And how it's not in any of our best interest to really become the reinvented empire, but rather to contend with our contradictions and work diligently to build a world anew, and remembering that no one is disposable. I also think about Dr. Ashon Crawley when he talks about the otherwise possibilities, and not as a place, but as a practice, the thing that we're doing time and time and time again, creating other worlds of existence. I also have been reflecting on revolutionary mothering and my particular commitment to remembering, right? We have to delve deeper and challenge the prevailing narratives. We have to understand genealogies and historiography. And I think so many of us, I also think of that particular quote, or not really quote, but that saying where it says, "I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams." And I don't think that many of us think of how egotistical that is. And it's also a reminder that we don't know the deep work that our ancestors have done and how they are with us, and they forged the path for so many of us. We have to be reflective when we're thinking about cultivating the liberation of our children, the liberation within ourselves, and how it presents ourselves, and how really to be integrated into white spaces doesn't become the barometer of our success, isn't the barometer for our humanity, and to be reflective of those. And then also how it also positions our children to equally believe that they might be the chosen one. And I think that sometimes that comes up in motherhood, where we become very competitive, which I also believe is part of the socialization that we all face, because we live in a capitalistic society. What creates hierarchies, and then those hierarchies create what those oppressions, and then we believe in scarcity as opposed to abundance. And so I really think, and I contend with the Masa in Kenya, where they don't say, "How are you doing?" as an individualistic way, but they say, "How are the children?" And for them, the barometer is that they can say that the children are well, then society is doing well. And so I think about revolutionary mothering as a connection for all of us to think about our community and ask that particular question: are the children well, as our way of contending with ourselves. And just a reminder of the interdependence, the connectivity to all of us. When we don't think about the socialization, it's very much Ubuntu, where it says that I am because you are, and because you are, therefore I am. And also the reminder that a person is a person because of people, and that we all have a contribution, and it's for all of us to work together through our connection and our mothering and our practices of cultivating otherwise possibilities that I stand on when it comes to revolutionary mothering, and how much I believe that the anthology uplifts this and contends with this in so many ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanay, Cecilia, Kellee. You all are amazing. If we were in person, I would ask people to give them another hand, but apparently just do it in your house or wherever you are, because they have all shared their amazing insights and brilliance with us. My daughter is now grown. The piece that I wrote for Revolutionary Mothering was written, it seems, a lifetime ago, when she was still a much younger, dependent child. And in that piece, I reflect on the importance of community support in our lives and in my ability to continue with my political organizing work and later with my writing work. And my piece really illustrates this idea of revolutionary mothering, as Kellee and Tanay and Cecilia have talked about this before, not as this biological or gendered act, but as how we show up as a community to support and to care for one another, regardless of whether or not we are biologically related to each other, regardless of our gender and gender identity, or any of the other roles and labels and expectations that are put on us. And this comes up again now that we have this pandemic, which has laid bare the lack of societal prioritizing of care work and the resources that are essential to our survival, particularly the survival of communities of color and other marginalized folks who have never, ever been seen as important in US society and in many societies. And what this pandemic has also shown us is the importance of redistributing resources, for example, food and money and childcare, and showing up to support one another's fights for these kinds of resources and needs. And over the summer, we saw this in our current demands around defunding the police and reinvesting in communities. So we saw that people were not having these same old tired conversations about what to do about police violence against people of color, police violence against children, and even adult children who have been brutalized and killed by police. When George Floyd was murdered, he called out for his mother. He was still somebody's child, even if he was a grown man. And so we see this in these demands that are saying we don't want nicer, kinder, gentler police to be putting their boots on our neck and, policing our children and locking them up. What we want are the community resources necessary for our communities and our children and our families, whether they be biological or chosen, to be able to survive and thrive. And at the same time, what we see is an explosion of mutual aid, which I actually want to think of as an act of revolutionary mothering, people coming together to make sure each other's basic needs are met. And that mutual aid in many places has been going grocery shopping or going to the pharmacy for people who are more vulnerable to COVID, and bringing them food, bringing them their needed medicines. But also in some places, this has included childcare. I read about the example in Minnesota at the start of the US pandemic of the Minnesota COVID sitters, a group of medical students who at the beginning of the pandemic organized childcare for hospital workers, and not just the doctors and the nurses who needed childcare, but also the janitorial and other non-medical staff who worked at hospitals and were pulling these tremendously long and grueling shifts. At the same time, schools and daycares had closed because of the coronavirus. And so what this group of medical students did was that they organized to provide childcare. They began recruiting other volunteers, they screened them, and then they trained them in how to do childcare and how to do all of the necessary like CPR and medical things that you would need if you were caring for somebody else's child. And then they assigned each small group of students or volunteers to a hospital worker's family, so that a hospital worker's family had 3 to 7 people that they would be able to call on for childcare when they got called into work, these harrowing 12, 14, 16-hour shifts when schools and daycares were closed. And as I was reading this, again, my daughter is grown, she's 20 years old now. I thankfully do not have to navigate this pandemic with a small child, but it struck me particularly as an act of revolutionary mothering, taking care of each other, reaching out to take care of other people, even if you don't necessarily have that close of a connection to them, because it's what my daughter benefited from in her earlier years. So I am very blessed to have a long, long friendship with China Martens, the co-editor of Revolutionary Mothering. She and I met when my daughter was 2. And in the earlier 2000s, when we first met, China started a pre-pandemic childcare collective called Kid City in Baltimore that actually went around and did childcare for organizers in Baltimore so that they would be able to participate in political organizing without the added stress and often financial burden of having to hire childcare or hire a babysitter or hire a nanny. And this was something that was happening in different cities across the country. And China and Kid City were part of a network of activist childcare collectives called the Intergalactic Conspiracy of Childcare Collectives. And I wanted to bring this up as examples of revolutionary mothering, specifically as mutual aid in this time of the pandemic, but also to bring up this idea that we are not waiting for politicians and governments to shift their priorities from killing work of policing and imprisonment and oppression to care work, but instead doing this work in the here and now to care for each other. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm kind of filled up. Like, I don't even want to speak that much, even though I guess I'm one of the co-editors, so I have to. But I feel so filled up hearing other people speak about revolutionary mothering. And I feel like the panel, like you spoke, it felt as diverse as the book is itself. And that made me so happy. So I'm just going to just talk for a few minutes about some connections that I had made and some of the places where I am now in relationship to revolutionary mothering. And I really want someone to watch my time for me. So I was thinking about how I was in conversation with Alexis Pauline Gumbs and China Martens 10 years ago, and we had just put out the call for papers that summer before in 2010 for revolutionary mothering. And and in 2011, so 10 years ago, we've just passed the 10-year anniversary for the Egyptian Revolution. January 25, 2011. And we're coming up on the ouster of the Egyptian dictator Mubarak on February 11th. So every year this time is a little bit heady for me. And the 10-year anniversary is especially heady for me. And at the same time that we were doing that, I would be out in the streets and then I would come home and I would be looking at all of these submissions for revolutionary mothering that were rolling in. I think the original date was like that spring somehow. And so these two things have always like played for me as a balancing point, working on revolutionary mothering in that first thrust and then working in a sort of global movement. And at the time, my daughter was 3 years old. So I want to hold that for a second. And then I want to, because a lot of what I experienced in 2011 and 2012 as I was raising my daughter and being active, I guess, is reflected in the ways that I came to this book and is reflected in like the ways that I made relationships at that time. So that's the first setting. And one of the things that I was thinking about, which Vicky kind of talked about, of course, I was like, if anyone's going to do it, it would have been Vicky, which is the connection between, at the time with the Egyptian Revolution and the Arab Spring in general is a police abolitionist movement. Easily, it's a prison and police abolitionist movement. The Egyptian Revolution begins on the Police Day, which is one of the very few national holidays that all Egyptians were allowed to not work on because it was a celebration of the police. And one of the first things that the activists did was open up the prisons, kick the police out of the city and then open up all the prisons. It was always very strongly an anti-police movement. And it was when the police were allowed back in that things started to go a little haywire. So first lesson is don't half-ass the revolution. When you get them out, get them out. And the other part of it, of course, is what I write about somewhat in Revolutionary Mothering, and then in the memoir that follows is about doing what I call practical radical care work, which in 2020 I learned has an official name called mutual aid. And I was like, oh, that's helpful, thanks. And that work, that practical radical care work, was the work that sustained us through the revolution, is the work that sustained us afterwards, and is the work that sustained me and my daughter, when I say us, but also obviously the communities at large, and is the work that sustained us this year. And so I see this really interesting thorough line between doing that radical care work that we talked about in the book in so many different forms. And 10 years later, when I was first thinking about it, 10 years later, seeing the fruition of it here in Minneapolis. Last point, when I'm in Minneapolis on Lakota and Anishinaabe land, but primarily Lakota and Dakota, and 2, it is 0 degrees Fahrenheit today. That is why I am wearing gloves. And that's the high. It'll be -10 for the low. And so that's the work that we do now here. 10 years later is doing, again, a police abolitionist movement, a prison abolitionist movement, and very strongly supporting those movements through mutual aid, through a quarantine in which people are isolated, they're locked down, they're removed from their communities, they're under incredible amounts of emotional stress. And I want to parallel that to what was happening in Egypt 10 years ago when people were locked down because the police had said that no one was allowed to leave the house for 12 hours a day. When people were isolated, they did the lockdown specifically so people couldn't be able to congregate. Obviously, that is not what's happening now. But the lessons that I learned about mothering and care work and mutual aid through that is the same work that I do now 10 years later. And I think that this is the sort of work that will sustain us for the long term. It's those building of mutual aid networks. It's that radical care work. It's that revolutionary mothering that will actually make it possible for us to have successful movements. So I'm going to sign off with that. Thank you.
You were so perfect, Mai'a. I actually was watching your time, and you were exactly 5 minutes. And yeah, I felt good. I was like, oh, I'm coming next. I can watch your time. And like you, I feel incredibly filled up by the panelists. I feel it's absolutely a representative of this book. I feel at ease and happy and safe and warm, where I started off this panel feeling a lot differently. And what I prepared a talk. I have like these notes, lots of notes. I prepared a very formal anti-poverty talk. And also speculating on like the academic industrial complex, which I don't know if that is something, but I was thinking that it is. And I was talking about how we need direct benefits to people to end poverty. So I have good notes here, and I have good critique, and I have like a timer, which I was like, this is probably gonna be loud, but I was like, maybe I could set this for 5 minutes. So like, I'm so old school. But just like when I was listening to everybody talk, it kind of made me want to say something more personal. Not talking to other people to try to make them understand why we need to end poverty. Not like sometimes when I'm public talking, when I think about public talking, I feel this really bad feeling because I feel like I'm being abused in a way to try to explain things over and over again that I feel are so important. Like I want to explain them. That's the reason why I've never left this work. Even though I write all different kinds of things and I see myself primarily as a writer, and I'm super interested in being a novelist, I feel that mother and children's issues have never been properly heard, and they're so integral to the world that we want to build. Like all our best dreams are here, and I see so much suffering and it makes me so angry. So I was trying to write like a very speech, like anti-poverty, like old school welfare mom critique, you know? And also I wanted to share about my experiences in 1996 under Clinton with welfare reform when I was kicked off welfare when my daughter was 8 years old, because I raised her on welfare until that moment. And in that moment, I was living in my grandmother's basement, and I went to school to be a nurse because I knew I needed to do something and I just didn't know what. And I was on the honor roll. I mean, I would have made a terrible nurse. I'm scared to death of Western medicine, but I was trying to like do what I needed to do to get us out of poverty. And I was on the honor roll, and I remember getting called into the welfare office, and it used to be so crowded. You would sit there, you would wait in line for like 5 hours. It'd be 4 or 5 hours before you would get called. And it was an incredibly crowded place. And I remember when welfare ended, we were all called in and we waited for about 4 hours. And we were told by the social worker or the person, whatever, we were told the welfare is over, there's no more welfare. Drop out of school, get a job, you know, it's done. And I was just looking at everybody and I was thinking, I was like, well, I have my grandmother, you know, like I'm living in her basement, but I was looking at people and I was looking at people with disabilities and just so many, everybody, like the crowdedness. And I was like, what's gonna happen? I couldn't imagine it. And I saw it drained to there being nobody in those offices, like a couple computers. I don't really understand how some people get a little bit of benefits, but it's just not at all the way it was. It was so drastic. It was like an epidemic. Like right now we're in a pandemic and we all feel it together, but it was like an epidemic of change. And that's, I guess, something I wrote. But again, I was like kind of talking to somebody else, like trying to make somebody else understand. But I know the importance is talking to each other because I know that you do understand. But I wrote, I says, have you ever seen a basic need for struggling people like welfare or like a bus line taken away? What happens to the people? They seem to disappear. And it was like in the newspapers, welfare reform was written, like in indie newspapers, it was written as a success because there was nobody in the welfare office anymore. So that was like a market of success. And there used to be such a strong welfare mother's voice in community papers and such a strong critique. And I really felt like things got really harder. And over the years, you know, we kind of aged out of poverty a little bit in the sense that I never climbed out of poverty as a mother, but that my daughter was old enough to work for support herself. And you know, you go on in your life, like good things and bad things, and it feels personal. But I started through Vicky's work. It was really Vicky that I learned about so many mothers, so many incarcerated mothers, and so many the numbers exploding in jail. And I don't feel like there has been a written correlation of this, but I'm just thinking if like so many people disappear here, and then all of a sudden, so many people are over there, like there might be a correlation. Like I feel like there could be a correlation here. And I just feel that it's really important to invest resources in people. I feel this is incredibly important. And I feel also, as I try to understand what's going on in the world, I started to see all these reports. Like for some reason it was popping up with Harvard a lot. Like Harvard did so many reports on why welfare reform was bad over and over again. And I just feel like there's so much money given into studies to study why things are bad rather than the money going to the root cause. It seems more efficient to end poverty. It seems more efficient to respect yourself and respect each other, because poverty doesn't just hurt poor people, it hurts everybody. Our health is connected. And I feel like it creates a climate of fear where everybody is crabs in a barrel. And I wrote something about how I think poverty is violence. Like I say in the bottom line of Revolutionary Mothering, and all classes suffer from inequality. The threat of poverty fuels injustice. It drives us like crabs in a barrel to prove our worth. Our well-being, our health is connected to each other. And the city is so divided. Okay, I'm going on and on. Try to get to the point. But just, this is ceasefire weekend in Baltimore, and institutional racism is also violence. We can't be numb and just say this is the way it is. The point I'm trying to get to is the great amount of funding and resources coming into institutions that are set apart from the communities that they are in to study the problems of the community in a way that actually makes money off those problems, instead of the resources going to those who do the work. I believe in direct benefits to parents, to caregivers, to children, to elders, to those with disabilities, to those who need it. I believe in direct respect. I believe in direct leadership, and that we should invest in people for our collective survival. So I was gonna say all this stuff about poverty, but that makes me upset. Like my heart's racing because it feels like there's so much common sense things. You can talk to your face is blue and it doesn't, nothing changes. There's always people who can overtalk you, complicated, things like, yes, we will, the plan always sounds good. Okay, in the newspaper, in the politician or whatever, you have to talk to the people who are actually living out that plan to find out what's really going on. And, but this revolutionary mothering panel was just making me think way back, was making me think just like my personal story of starting a zine in 1990 when I was a young mother. And I guess I was 21, turning 22, and I felt pretty free. And I felt a lot of dreams of freedom and community. And it was a lot harder, the reality of having a child. And I was really shocked by the lack of support from my community is one thing. And so it set me back, to like being a zinester, which is integral to me, because I would think that publishing was out of my range. The same way I feel bad feelings when I think about I'm talking with Johns Hopkins, like I'm scared of this more official range, but in a zine, it's a very, very unofficial place, and that I felt comfort with. That was what I was raised with. I was raised with strong love from my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother. They were seamstress, they were letter writers. In the home, we had power of like the reality of creating things. And in a zine, I felt like I'm a truth teller. I could say anything. Time check. So yeah, it just makes me think of the power of that we have. And Revolutionary Mothering is a super powerful book for me too. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. Just wow. And China, like we could have listened to you do that, keep going. Give us that deep history, give us the connection. All the ways that I think Tanay, somebody said in the chat, we need to be doing this research. It's historiographical. And it's also got institutional ramifications. So what I'd love to do is, I'm time checking myself. What I want to do then is open things up for the group to have a conversation. So I'm gonna get us all spotlighted. And at the same time, I'm gonna make the chat available. And Q&A, I believe, is available for asking questions. But if the audience is like me, we want to hear you guys, chop it up and talk to each other. So I just want to, I'm just going to step back and let you all have the floor, please.
I feel like China started something. That's all I want to talk about is how, while trying to hold these systems accountable, like still having the energy to build the world we want to see, right? It's daunting. I don't even talk like that. And I just want to say real quick too, I kind of got messed up at the beginning. The woman I was talking about, my friend who lost her baby, like texted me right before and said that her aunt passed, and this aunt like raised like mad children. and me being, as a young person being around her was impacted too. So I was kind of like a little, so yeah. But I mean, that's the issue, right? Like these systems eating us and us trying to build the world we want to see.
I really think some of it is money. Like I know it's not money isn't everything and people are wealthy in different ways, but it's like all this time coming from a mutual aid framework. I'm so tired. Like I think there has to be like, it's like your money is where your mouth is, and there has to be like just checks going out to everybody. And that's what's going on in the pandemic right now. And that's what they're talking about. And things are changing in that way, you know? And I just think that that's a very efficient way. I think it's really weird for me to try to, I was just reading political stuff like 2 days ago, and it's like, it feels a weird thing to bring up, but I mean, okay, so we have, the United States currently has among the highest rate of child poverty in the so-called developed world. So right now there's a bunch of promises of like a new president, and you don't know what will happen, but policymakers are looking into direct payment to the poor. So Biden has a plan to expand child benefits with direct deposit. And then Mitt Romney has a plan that he's going to put up, that he wants to like give more money than the Democrats, where he's like, I'm going to give more money to kids by eliminating welfare and tax credits and like everything else. So it sounds like actually super scary bad. But yeah, but I just think like, when you talk about being tired, it's like we have enough. And I do think maybe it's like universal basic income or some kind of, also we have a new mayor in Baltimore. I think there's a lot of people just trying to seize that power and trying to like people power, and like I feel like we need money going to the right places. I'm curious
Well,
how other people are holding up. Like, do you feel, yeah, like how are you holding up? Like you're all.
I mean, it's very holding up in regards to like time and space and the moment has been very interesting in a good way, in a very like loving way, a very reflective way of all of those mothering stories through time and space, through past, thinking of my family, folks in community, is just like rearing itself and in ways that I've made the connection, but making the connection even more so like in this moment where it's like you're holding all of the things, all the ancestral energy. And it's just like, it's a lot of like those stories not told, which I think is very beautiful about the anthology of like the moments and how we, being reflective of self, we don't always listen to people. We oftentimes want to try to tell the story for others, or the stories that are more palatable to our liking. So I'm taking like my head is like spinning, and I don't know what that energy is. It's like all my aunties who have gone, and my cousins, and then some who are like coming, and it's like all of this is bringing up their stories. And it's also trying to, and also to our collective conversations of like those dreams deferred and why they're deferred, and having to contend with that a bit is also rearing itself as well.
Yeah, I can respond to the how am I holding up? Like I said, it's 0 degrees. So, but in terms of the panini, the pandemic itself, in relationship to mothering, my daughter is 13 years old right now. She'll be 14 in April. So she had her 13th birthday she turned 13 under quarantine, and she'll probably turn 14 also under quarantine. And I don't know if any of y'all have hung out with a young teenage girl before. It's a lot of energy. Anyways, being stuck in a very small house, So I find that one of the things I'm having to navigate is being emotionally present and emotionally intelligent for someone who doesn't have what I would think of as the normal outlets for their social and emotional development, you know, like that's a very pivotal time, and kind of being cut off from all that while still going through, like it's a very interesting moment. And that's kind of why I think I've been reflecting back like 10 years before, because I was like, oh, I had this toddler who had to be like on lockdown inside the house in a small apartment, right? And I don't know if you've ever hung out with I know you have, a 3 or 4-year-old running around in a small apartment where they can't go outside for long periods of time. It also has a similar kind of energy to it. And so for me, it's become much more of like an emotional, spiritual practice of trying to be really, really present for someone who needs so much more than what I can do. It's just, she's not an extrovert, but I mean, come on, y'all. And attempting to stay as centered as I can so I can do that for her. Because it feels, there's a lot of, how do I put this? There's a lot of identities and moods shifts happening relatively quickly, much quicker than I do. And so like doing that kind of work feels like this very deep internal work, constantly having to pay attention. And I think that that might be one of the skills that comes about in people learning to do sort of care work. And you talked about listening, is this sort of like constant, it's almost like a barometer or a feedback loop, because if I get it wrong, I'll get the feedback very immediately, right? If I didn't listen well, I will be told that in no uncertain terms. So glad she and I have similar communication styles. And so, and so that's really the sort of, even more so, I mean, we have other issues as well, but on that day-to-day sort of internal level, trying to be the kind of person who can make this as less traumatizing as possible. Like that feels like the work that I'm doing right now, internally, inside.
China, I don't know if you see it, China Mai'a, there's a question in the chat from Elaine. It says, but how much is trusting in politicians in the current system, buying into the false generosity of paternalism? As Paula Freire says, our child care collective often talks about the trap of buying into liberal reformism, which just serves to prop up the current oppressive system. Plus, almost all of the benefits coming to us in the US come at the expense of those in the poorer parts of the world. I'd be really excited for more international solidarity in our movements. Elena.
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I don't think anybody on this panel is saying we need to believe politicians when they say that they have our best interest at heart. However, under the society that we currently live in, you know, politicians and governments hold enormous purse strings. So I think that, you know, these movements to defund the police, to shift monies away from these things that kill people to these other things, no matter how liberal and how reformist they are, you know, actually help people survive, you know, like food, housing assistance, moratoriums on evictions, you know, like low-cost healthcare, free healthcare, like in New York City. I don't know if this is the case in other places where people are, like COVID testing is free, which is good because then you can go and you can get a COVID test and not get worry about getting charged hundreds or thousands of dollars. And then, you know, you can like go about your business, go to the supermarket, et cetera, and not spread COVID all over the place. But, you know, like we shouldn't be like content with just that. We should always be pushing for more. And then I think also there's the question, I forget who said it originally. I heard it from Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who is a prison abolitionist and a carceral geographer that looks at how prisons have, you know, changed the US landscape. She talks about non-reformist reforms. What are the reforms? And she talks about this in the concept of prisons, but let's think of this in terms of society, what are the reforms that are going to strengthen these oppressive institutions? So when we talk about, say, pregnant people in prison, we don't want to say like, yes, let's have a special prison just for pregnant people. We want to say, don't fucking imprison pregnant people. So what are the reforms that are going to cause there to be more, that are going to strengthen the carceral system or strengthen the systems of oppression? And what are the reforms that make a concrete difference in people's lives? Because you can't say, hey, pregnant folks in prison, just hold on to that baby a little bit longer while we do the decades long work to abolish the prison system. So what are the things that need to happen now, and what are the ways we can act so that we're not strengthening this system that's just going to come down like a hammer on us and our communities down the line?
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. Yeah, I just want to add to that it makes me also think of Revolutionary Mothering, the book, and how it's framed and how different chapters also address that care work is life-giving work, care work is political. So I also come from a framework of my mother, who was she's an immigrant, and at the time when she came to California, she was undocumented and Spanish speaking, and although my mom wasn't involved in any political organizing, she was able to, she did have different kinds of embodied knowledge or resistance, just within the home in different ways. And although my relationship is complex or kind of with my mom, but I, she did the best that she could under these conditions, and that mothering and caregiving is also political in that context of how she navigated the systems. And she didn't have, my mom didn't have, for me, having access to higher education or even the English language to kind of navigate more of these institutions, but she did. And so I also think, I also recognize my privilege in the sense of having access to higher education and different collective spaces, academic spaces, but that thinking about my mother and her mothering informs what I'm able to do. So I just wanted to contribute that. So thank you.
Cecilia, I just love the birds chirping in the background. Just puts a whole different ambiance to it. And if I'll quickly add, thinking about what Victoria and Cecilia are saying, and even the question that Elena positions, what also comes to mind is the ways in how we think we'll shame folks into liberation. And, these moments of, there was an elder of mine who was talking about smaller communities who needed to get out and vote. And he doesn't believe in the system. He's completely very clear that this is a settler colonial country that we live in and all of that. But he was talking about the very real ways and how the everyday life of people needs to contend with this binary, right? While equally working to build, as I said, Dr. Ashton Crowley talks about the otherwise possibilities. And it was interesting that people started putting on social media that he was co-opted. And I'm like, you're not hearing really what he's saying. It's there are systems in place that we have to work through and equally know the larger end goal as well. But we tend to think that it has, it's not going to change very quickly. And folks don't when Tony K. Bombara says, what she said, oh man, not all speed is movement, right? And so we think that these things come very, very quickly, and they don't. And we think that we just shame folks because they're not thinking the same, which I think is another part of the revolutionary mothering component of this, of we're going to be in space and place and in community with folks who we do not agree with, but we have to provide that deep love factor. And it's really not about the ideological as much as it is about how do we provide space and place for the both and to really build that particular world that we need. And it's not going to happen from the shaming, but it is equally going to be the both and in all that we do.
Yes.
All of that.
So I just want to jump in quickly just to check out the chat. There's a comment, and well, I think it's more of a comment than a question, and then a question. So the comment is from Shay. Thanks for being here. Yes, responding to China, that funding and policy implication. Yes, read the funding and policy implications. I so appreciate the association of revolutionary mothering with love, all caps, under many names like radical care, mutual aid. It reminds me of the long history of women of color, particularly Black women, who redefined love, i.e. philanthropy, as critical practice for social and political change. And it calls to mind this critical work, Sitting with Sick, African American Women's Philanthropy, and there's a link to that in the chat as well. And there is also a question from Candace Martin. I'm curious if anyone else has thoughts about how mothering children in the future looks as we face more radical right-wing politics with longstanding violence spearheaded by white women, particularly white mothers, heavily influencing anti-governmental conspiracy theories, etc. Thinking of Kyle Rittenhouse's mother, Wendy, supplying guns and transportation across state lines to seek opportunity to target, assault, and potentially kill, which he did, people in BLM. Moreover, how do we protect our children in this violent racist society with a lack of accountability for violent perpetrators?
Can I answer? I think I can answer part of the second question or a comment. Well, anyways, I'll just whatever. So I live in Minnesota. Minnesota is the second most racist state in the country. The first most racist state in the country is Wisconsin, and Kenosha was in Wisconsin. And I live like I can walk to Wisconsin in less than 2 miles. Like I live on the border of I live there is my point. And I live in a very conservative part of the world, of the country. That's why, for instance, Minneapolis blew up the way it did earlier this year, and that's why Kenosha happened as well. This is the culture in which we sort of, unless you're in Milwaukee or Minneapolis, and I spend half my time in the rural, deep county part, it's beautiful. And I do that raising my 13-year-old Black daughter, biracial Black daughter, who is my daughter. So, you know, she has certain viewpoints on the world. And so I think that's the part I can answer to, which is that one, you know, a couple of weeks ago, as I think my daughter was going through a kind of slight, you know, like a dip depression, not a full thing, but hanging out in there because like 6 hours of sun. She said, you know what, it's really stressful. She was up at 2:30 in the morning. She couldn't sleep. And she's like, you know, those people, they like attacked the Capitol and half of our neighbors are Trump supporters. And we know that because of the signs. Because, you know. And so, yeah, and I had to sit there for the next hour and a half as we kind of talked through it slowly but surely, being really honest. I've always been really honest and upfront about what are the forces, where we live, who these people are, why we don't do certain things, why I'm very, like I don't drive in Minnesota. I never do. I've been here for 5 years, would never drive a car. And I knew that from moving here. That was clear. It was clear how Black people get caught up in the system here. So I think that part of it is that we have to sort of create, at least inside of the homes, to create these small spaces in which children are able to still be fully themselves, be Black, be brown, be fully themselves, knowing always that they go to school with people who are white supremacists, that some of their teachers may be white supremacists, that the person who like gives them coffee, well, my daughter doesn't have coffee, but you know, when we go to the coffee shop, we don't know who it is. And so there's very much a sense of like this inside outside feeling. I don't try to create something that says they're the enemy. I'm not trying to, but to be very clear about what the dangers are. Most of the children, a good amount of the children who are in the juvie systems, even though I live in this town that's 97% white, the majority of the people in the juvie systems are of color, right? Which is, you know, like, where are you finding all these kids of color? Like, where? So I think that that's just for me, it's a practice of really deep honesty and deep transparency and modeling both, I don't want to use the word courage, but like modeling a way of being in the world that says I come here fully and I'm really careful about where I step. As for the larger questions, I think I'll leave it there.
I think we're all contending with those questions, especially right now.
Yes.
I mean, we're doing the best that we can. I don't think that, I mean, some of these are things that have happened over and over in history, right? Like that I talk to my kids about it. We talk. I be trying not to look at what's the news a lot. But I have a child who's really like into knowing, what's going on. And so we have to have those conversations. And we're and I mean, Texas is Texas, right? Austin be trying to, oh, we the little blueberry in the sea of tomato soup or whatever. Austin is very confused about who it is. And here too, right? Like we have still have Black children being removed at like 400% the rate of white children when it comes to CPS and the like. And I mean, I think that we just have to keep loving fiercely and surrounding ourselves with the folks that, that make sense. And that's really all, that we can do is continuing to build and practice, right? Like, what is it? What do we want to see? What's missing?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kellee. And just to comment really quickly on Tanay about centering radical joy. So I'm sure you'll have something to share as well, but just really briefly, that makes me think of, Kelly's comments make me think of as well, Dr. Bettina Love, who's the author of the book, We Want to Do More Than Survive. During a presentation a couple of months ago, she was talking about the importance for educators at the K through 12 level to teach history, but Black history specifically. And she said a phrase, she said, if you're going to teach my history, tell the whole history. And she gave an example of when students are taught, in this case, Black students or students of color, when we're taught when they learn these histories about systems of oppression and other aspects, she said, for example, like the Middle Passage. So she said, the Middle Passage, she said, there's often ways that that's taught. And she said, but she said for her, she said that her ancestors who were on the Middle Passage, whether they lived or did not live, she said, that was the greatest act of love. And I think that reframing it in terms of having space for to hold this intergenerational grief and trauma, but also to hold the joy and the love. And Tanay, did you want to speak more to that? Or I don't know, just because of your comment, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
No, I was just putting it out to the entire panel of, how are we doing it? Because I think it could, I think a lot of times it's like when we're thinking around revolutionary mothering, folks think of it as every single day. Of course, our joy is an act of resistance, right? But people tend to think that we're constantly fighting and there's no moments of joy and love and laughter, which is very central to the work of revolutionary mothering, of just simply being and having those moments, having the snowball fight when it's cold and you don't want to, and finding moments to just laugh and to paint and to simply be and to have loud music and to in your house, and to just cultivate our children as they're equally cultivating us as well. And it's really important when we're thinking around, I was thinking about my little one who's 5, and Amon, when he was away from me, he created a poster and it said Black Lives Matter, period. And he did this without me. No one else was around. That was the poster that he did. And he did red, black, and green hearts on it. And I was, and it really touched my heart in a way where there's moments where you're like, am I doing this whole thing right? And of course we had a larger conversation of Black lives have always mattered regardless of the white gaze, right? And so what does that mean? When we're talking about, he likes to say Kuji Jakalia, right? So self-determination. And so what does that look like when we're talking about a liberatory praxis? But just those moments of celebrating, I just think are extremely amazing, where I think people just think this revolutionary acts of resistance don't equally equate to joy. And we have lots of joy, lots of laughter, because without it, without that particular balance, we will cease to exist. Which I think it also is like at the very ending of June Jordan's The Creative Spirit, like, you know, when she wants to ask children, what is it? I don't want to take up time for it, but she said, and I want to say to children, tell me what you think and what you see and what you dream, so that I might hope to honor you. And I want these things for children because I want these things for myself and for all of us, because unless we embody these attitudes and precepts as the governing rules of our love and of our political commitment to survive, we will love in vain and we will certainly not survive. I believe that the creative spirit is nothing less than the love made manifest. And I deeply hope that we can make love powerful, because otherwise there would be no reason for hope.
That, I mean, we were laughing and we're experiencing a bunch of joy in our call, right? I think somebody said something real funny, and then Tanay came with where the money resides, and just it was everything. But yeah, no, we dance and we sing and we laugh and we, you know, we eat. So that's how we make it, right?
I think it was Victoria, her moment when she said, excuse me,
yeah.
She said my hip hurt. So I said, I'll put my hand upon your hip. You know, it's just a moment.
Yes.
It's a moment of like all of the talking. You just need a moment to just bring it together and just laugh, because if we won't do it for each other, no one else is going to do it for us. That's for sure.
I was like, I know I like these people.
I hate to bring this to any kind of close, because it's really beautiful to see this and to be to see the communities and to be able to kind of sit in the communal space with you guys as you teach us and as we learn so much. But we're a little bit over, and I want to really respect everybody's time, especially because, you know, mama's got real strict time rules as I'm learning more and more. Are there any, does anybody want to say, have anything that they really want to bring out right now, or any last thoughts to share? A last word?
I just want to be thankful to the folks on the panel, and I feel like I learned so much from y'all just even in this talk. And I read the book years ago, but I'm gonna reread it again just because of this conversation. And yeah, it made me really happy, and I appreciate being able to be up here with y'all. Y'all are incredible.
I just want to also add the we did comments here, but people are also watching on YouTube, and a couple of the 11 comments have been, I feel like I've learned so much more about mutual aid. I'm floored by your collective wisdom. And also, thank you for your radical resistance, your example, and making our work, labor, organizing, and love as mothers possible. So thank you guys so much. This is the last event of today for this conference, but please join us right here again tomorrow for the final reverse keynote, as well as panels. We're going to close things out with China Martens. I want to say thank you so much, everybody who was here. This is amazing, and I hope that everybody watching, you know, feels the warmth and the love, but also the call to action, the call to work, and the call to care for each other. And I'm going to let China have the last word before we close it all the way out. China, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I just want to say that I feel like revolutionary mothering is also inspiration. And I felt very inspired by the Johns Hopkins sit-in student activists. And I love how they had like 3 clear demands. It was no armed campus police, which there's still, I know that's still like an ongoing battle. No defund ICE, which there's some kind of connection going on there. And then the third demand was justice for Tyrone West. And as his sister, Tawanda Jones always says, and all victims of police brutality. Baltimore is such a city of revolutionary mothering, and I just wanted to like, yeah, just say something from like where we are right here. And thank you for all people who inspire, because we need each other.
That was perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Perfect and necessary. Thank you all. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you everybody who came, and have a beautiful Saturday. Enjoy. Get some vitamin D if you can. Bye everybody.